My name's Todd. I'm 46 and I live in Waukegan, Illinois. I used to believe marriage was a fortress, a place where two people sheltered from the storms outside. Turns out, mine was just a sandcastle waiting for the tide to come in. I met my wife, Jenna, in college. We were the kind of couple everyone thought would last, partners in every sense. She was sharp, driven, had this light in her eyes that could make me forget the world. We built a life together, slow and steady. I wasn't rich or flashy, but I provided stability, and she said that was enough. But lately, things have been off. Jenna had started hanging out more with her best friend, Colleen. They'd known each other since high school, and while I always thought Colleen was a little too gossipy for my taste, I never imagined she'd have the power to wreck everything. It was subtle at first. Jenna would come home late from their wine nights, brushing off my concerns. I'd find texts from Colleen that were just a little too personal, a little too pointed. Then there were whispers, little comments about how men can't be trusted, that Jenna started echoing. I chalked it up to stress. Her work was intense, and Colleen had been through a nasty divorce. Misery loves company, right? The twist hit me one Friday night. I come home from work, tired and ready to unwind, when Jenna handed me a neatly typed letter. Not a text, not a conversation, a letter. She said she was filing for divorce. No real explanation, just that she'd learned things and couldn't trust me anymore. I stood there, the words blurring on the page. Apparently, Colleen had told her I was cheating, and not just a fling, but a whole affair with some woman Jenna didn't even know. I was blindsided. I'd never been unfaithful, not even close. I tried to talk to Jenna to get her to see reason, but it was like she'd already decided I was guilty. She packed her bags and left that weekend. The real good punch? Colleen's lie wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment thing. I found out later she'd orchestrated the entire story, feeding Jenna fake messages, photoshopped proof, and twisted versions of half her conversations. And Jenna believed her, trusted her more than she trusted the man she'd spent 2 decades with. But the story doesn't end there. After she left, I didn't even have time to process it. Friends started calling, mutual ones who just wanted to check in, but were clearly fishing for gossip. Jenna had told everyone her side of the story, painting me as the cheating husband who threw everything away. It was like the whole town of Waukegan had taken her side overnight. My own parents called me, their voices cautious, asking if there was any truth to the rumors. I was floored. I'd spent my whole marriage being the dependable one, the guy who kept our finances stable, the one who didn't take Jenna's occasional mood swings personally, and now everyone believed I'd wrecked it all with some affair. The next twist came a week later. I got a call from an unknown number, and for some reason, I answered. It was Colleen's husband. I didn't even know she was married. His voice was low, almost embarrassed, and he said, "Hey, I think you need to know something." Turns out, Colleen wasn't just spreading lies about me. She was cheating on her husband, and when he found out, she'd throw me under the bus to distract Jenna. Colleen's own marriage was crumbling, and she'd used me as a scapegoat to cover her tracks. The man on the phone told me he had proof, messages between Colleen and some guy she'd been seeing on the side. It explained everything. Why she was so invested in wrecking my marriage. Why she wanted to make sure Jenna didn't question her too closely. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with a broken marriage. I was dealing with a calculated betrayal. I'll admit, when I hung up the phone, I sat there in stunned silence. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw something across the room. All those months, all that trust Jenna had handed over to Colleen, and it was all a cover for Colleen's own mess. I felt this strange mix of anger and relief. Anger, because I'd lost my marriage over lies. Relief, because at least now I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the monster Jenna had painted me to be. A few days later, Jenna's brother reached out. He's always been a stand-up guy, someone I respected even when Jenna and I were fighting. He said Jenna was starting to question things. The story didn't hold up as well as Colleen had hoped, and cracks were showing. Apparently, Jenna had caught Colleen in another lie. A small one about something unrelated, but it was enough to make her pause. And then, as if fate had a twisted sense of humor, Jenna found a folder in Colleen's house during one of their get-togethers. It was full of receipts, messages, and photos that didn't involve me at all. It was proof of Colleen's infidelity. The twist? Colleen had tried to use that same folder to frame me. She'd meant to find it and show it to Jenna as proof of my betrayal. But she'd been sloppy, and it backfired spectacularly. I didn't hear from Jenna for almost 2 weeks after her brother's call. I figured that was it. She'd been humiliated enough by Colleen's lies, and her pride probably wouldn't let her admit she'd been wrong. I tried not to dwell on it, focused on work, kept myself busy, but there was this ache under my skin that wouldn't go away. You spend years building a life with someone, trusting them implicitly, and then one person's whispers can burn it all to the ground. I wasn't bitter so much as exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that sleep doesn't fix. But then, late one evening, Jenna texted. A simple message. Can we talk? I'll admit my hand shook as I typed back. When and where? We met the next afternoon at a little diner we used to go to in the early years. I sat there nursing a coffee while she walked in looking like a ghost of herself. Thinner, pale, eyes red from crying. She slid into the booth across from me, hands trembling so much she couldn't even lift her water glass. She didn't start with an apology, just sat there in silence, staring at the table like it might give her the words she couldn't find. Finally, she spoke, voice hoarse and small. I don't know what to say, Todd. I messed up. I wanted to scream, to ask why she trusted Colleen more than me, why she hadn't just talked to me when doubts crept in. But I didn't. I just stared at her and said, yeah, you did. She flinched but nodded. I found a folder, she whispered, and Colleen admitted everything. She said she was scared I'd leave her too, like her husband did, that she thought if she made you look bad enough, I don't know. I feel so stupid. I shook my head. You're not stupid, Jenna. You trusted the wrong person. Tears welled up in her eyes. I'm so sorry. I was so sure. And now it's all ruined. We're ruined. I let out a long breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm not here to gloat, Jenna. I'm not here for an apology. I just need you to understand something. When trust breaks, it doesn't shatter clean. It splinters into pieces you can't always fit back together. I don't think we can fix this. Not because I hate you, not because I don't love you anymore, but because some things once broken stay broken. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed quietly. People in the diner pretended not to notice, but I could feel their eyes flicking toward us. I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt clear-headed. I stood, dropped a few bills on the table, and said softly, "Take care of yourself, Jenna." As I turned to leave, she reached out and grabbed my sleeve. Her touch was feather-light, trembling. "Please, Todd, don't walk away." I paused, my heart twisting, but I didn't sit back down. "I already did," I said, barely above a whisper. And then I left her there, alone in that diner we'd once called ours. I didn't look back. It's funny how the world doesn't stop when your life falls apart. I went back to my apartment, a small place I'd barely spent time in because I was always with Jenna. Suddenly, it felt cavernous, every corner echoing with what we'd lost. I sat there in the dim light of my living room, wondering how a marriage that felt solid a few months ago had turned into ashes overnight. I wish I could say I moved on immediately, found clarity, and started fresh. But the truth was I spiraled a bit. Friends stopped calling, probably because they didn't know what to say or because Jenna had made me the villain in her version of events. I'd walk into the grocery store or the gym and feel eyes on me, whispers behind my back. I became that guy, the one who cheated, the one who lost his wife because he couldn't keep it in his pants. The irony made me sick. And then came the next twist. Colleen's husband, his name was Matt, texted me again. This time, he wasn't just sharing proof of Colleen's lies. He was furious. Apparently, after Colleen's story fell apart, she tried to spin a new one. She told Matt that I'd been blackmailing her, that I was threatening to expose her affair unless she made Jenna leave me. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. But Matt wasn't buying it. He was done with her lies. He said he was filing for divorce and taking her to court over custody of their kids. I didn't even know they had kids. Matt's call was the final puzzle piece. I realized Colleen had been playing a long game, weaving lies on top of lies, using Jenna and me as pawns in her own crumbling life. But what struck me most was how easily Jenna had fallen into the trap. The woman I'd built a life with, trusted with my deepest thoughts, had been so quick to believe the worst of me. The next week, Jenna called again. I didn't answer. She texted, left voicemails, even came by my apartment. I stood by the window, watching her knock on the door, her face pale and drawn. Part of me ached to open it, to let her in, to believe we could still fix this. But a bigger part of me, the one that had finally learned what it felt like to be betrayed, held firm. I didn't answer the door. It's strange how silence becomes a presence in your life. Jenna's calls and texts gradually slowed until they stopped altogether. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like a fog that seeped into the walls of my apartment. I filled the space with old habits, running before dawn, cooking meals that fed only me, working late into the night. And yet, no matter how many miles I ran or spreadsheets I finished, there was a part of me that fell hollow. I couldn't stop thinking about how it all unraveled. I'd always known Colleen had her flaws, but I never imagined she'd go so far. I replayed moments in my mind. Times when Jenna seemed a little distant or preoccupied, times when I brushed it off as stress from work or her friendship with Colleen. Hindsight was cruel. It showed me every crack I'd ignored, every warning sign I'd missed. And then, one evening as I was sifting through mail I'd been too distracted to open, I found a letter from an attorney. It was divorce papers. Formal, stark, emotionless. The envelope was thick with legal language and a list of demands that made my stomach churn. It wasn't just about splitting assets. Jenna wanted spousal support, half of everything we'd built together. The betrayal stung afresh. Even after the truth had come out, even after she realized she'd been manipulated, she still went through with the divorce. The next day, I called my own lawyer. I wasn't going to roll over and give Jenna everything she wanted. I wasn't vindictive, but I wasn't stupid either. I gathered every receipt, every bank statement, every text thread that painted the real story. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Elise, assured me we had a solid case. A week later, Jenna's brother reached out again. He asked if I could meet him for coffee. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. When we met, he looked exhausted, guilt shadowing his features. He told me Jenna had been spiraling, guilt, shame, the weight of what she'd done crushing her. But it was too late for regrets. She wanted me to tell you she's sorry, he said quietly. She knows it doesn't fix anything, but she's sorry. I nodded, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions. I thanked him for passing along the message, but I didn't ask him to tell her anything in return. I didn't need an apology. After the meeting with Jenna's brother, I felt something shift. Not relief, exactly, more like the final click of a puzzle piece falling into place. The weight of Jenna's apology, delivered through her brother, didn't soothe the wounds or erase the betrayal, but it did close the chapter. It was like the last line of a painful book I hadn't wanted to read, but couldn't put down. Life didn't become easier overnight. The divorce proceedings dragged on longer than I anticipated. Jenna's lawyers pushed for more than I thought was fair, but Elise fought back with precision and calm. There were days I sat in my apartment, surrounded by stacks of documents, feeling like my life was reduced to paperwork and signatures. Friends, what few remained, offered sympathetic nods but kept their distance, wary of getting tangled in the mess. Then came the twist I never expected. About a month after Jenna's brother's visit, I was walking out of the local coffee shop, one I'd started frequenting just to get out of the apartment. As I stepped into the parking lot, I spotted a familiar figure leaning against a car. It was Matt, Colleen's husband, or should I say, ex-husband, because by then, he had finalized his divorce. His posture was relaxed, but his face was drawn, tired in a way I recognized. He called out to me. I hesitated, but curiosity, or maybe a perverse sense of solidarity, made me walk over. He started with an apology for the unexpected ambush, then handed me a sealed envelope. Inside were photos, printouts of text messages, and legal statements from his divorce proceedings. He said he thought I deserved to know everything. That's when I learned the full scope of Colleen's lies. She hadn't just fabricated stories about me to Jenna. She'd manipulated her own husband, painted herself as the victim while orchestrating her betrayals. Some of the messages detailed her relationship with a coworker, one who'd been at the center of their social circle. She'd been feeding Jenna half-truths for years, priming her to distrust me long before the fake evidence. Matt said he thought Jenna deserved to know, too, but he doubted she'd listen. I agreed. Jenna was already trapped in her guilt and regret, and hearing the truth from him might just feel like more salt in the wound. Still, I thanked him. Not because it changed anything. It didn't, but because it confirmed something I'd already suspected. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't a monster. I was just collateral damage in someone else's toxic story. I wish I could say that learning the full truth brought me closure. It didn't. If anything, it left me feeling hollow, like a character in a story whose ending was rewritten without his input. The pieces finally fit, but the picture they formed wasn't one I wanted to hang on my wall. Over the next few weeks, I focused on the logistics of divorce, selling the house, splitting accounts, working with Elise to make sure I didn't get steamrolled in court. Jenna's messages dwindled and eventually stopped. I imagined her sitting alone in the apartment we used to share, surrounded by echoes of a life that used to be ours. I didn't wish her harm. I didn't wish her well, either. I just stopped wishing. For the first time in a long time, I stopped trying to manage everyone else's emotions and focused on mine. Then came a twist I never saw coming. One morning, Elise called me into her office. I assumed it was about another document to sign, but her expression was unusually tense. She slid a folder across the desk, and said, "You need to see this." Inside were printouts of emails, bank records, and property documents. They weren't mine or Jenna's, they were Colleen's. Somehow, in her desperation to cover her tracks, Colleen had left a digital paper trail connecting her financial misdeeds not just to Matt, but to Jenna's accounts as well. Elise explained that Colleen had siphoned money from a joint investment account Jenna and I had opened years ago, using Jenna's credentials. Jenna hadn't even realized it. Colleen had used her trust to gain access, then drained funds bit by bit under the guise of managing some side investment. Elise said the amount was significant enough to open a criminal investigation, but she doubted Jenna would want to press charges. For a moment, I just sat there, absorbing the weight of it all. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was financial, legal, and deliberate. I thought back to every time I told Jenna to be careful, to double-check her finances. She'd wave me off, trusting her friend implicitly. "Do you want to pursue this?" Elise asked quietly. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to see Colleen held accountable, to watch her perfect little facade crumble in a courtroom. But another part of me, the part that was tired, that just wanted to move on, whispered that it wasn't worth it. "No," I said finally. "I'm done. Let her be someone else's problem." Elise nodded, understanding. She closed the folder, sealing it shut like the last chapter of a book I never wanted to open again. After the meeting with Elise, I walked out of her office feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the decision to let it go felt like finally dropping a weight I'd been carrying for too long. Heavier because that weight had been a part of me for so long. I wasn't sure who I was without it. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove aimlessly through Waukegan streets, passing places Jenna and I used to go, the little diner with a neon sign, the park where we'd walked hand in hand, the bookstore where she'd once picked out a novel for me. Those places were still there, unchanged, like silent witnesses to a story that had ended. The people in them didn't know me, didn't know what had happened. They just kept living their lives while mine felt frozen. Eventually, I ended up by the lake, parking by the old pier. I got out of the car and stood there, watching the water lap against the wood. The wind was sharp and cold, but clear my head. For the first time, I realized that Jenna and Colleen hadn't just betrayed me. They'd stolen time. Time I'd spent trying to salvage something already gone. Time I couldn't get back. And yet, as I stood there, breathing in the sharp air, I felt a tiny spark of something new. Not hope exactly. Maybe just the understanding that the story wasn't over. Not really. It was just different now. I could stand there, looking back at everything I'd lost, or I could turn around and face whatever came next. I didn't make a dramatic decision. There was no grand epiphany, no declaration that I was going to start fresh or find myself. Just a quiet, stubborn decision to keep going, to live, to take the next step, even if it was a small one. That night, back in my apartment, I started packing up the things I didn't need anymore, the reminders of a marriage that wasn't coming back. I donated her clothes, boxed up photos, gave away furniture that felt too heavy with memories. The place looked emptier, but somehow it felt lighter. I didn't feel healed, not even close, but I felt ready. The days turned into weeks, and though the sting of betrayal dulled, it never quite faded. Every so often, I'd catch myself replaying moments in my head, not out of nostalgia, but out of a quiet need to understand. What I missed, what had I ignored, why had I trusted too easily? But no matter how many times I turned it over, there were no answers that satisfied the gnawing questions. I started to rebuild in small ways. I reached out to old friends I hadn't spoken to in years, met them for lunch or drinks. Some were hesitant, not sure how to navigate the awkwardness, but a few welcomed me back like no time had passed. I realized how much I'd let myself become isolated, not just by Jenna's betrayal, but by my own stubbornness. I'd built a world around her, and when that world collapsed, I didn't know who I was without it. One afternoon, I ran into an old neighbor, Mrs. Daly, who'd always been a bit nosy but genuinely kind. She asked how I was holding up, and for once, I didn't brush it off with a polite smile. I told her the truth, that things had been hard, that I felt lost, but I was trying. She surprised me by squeezing my hand and saying, "It's not weakness to start over, Todd. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do." That stuck with me. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a text, a real, handwritten letter. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Jenna's. I stood there in my apartment, the envelope heavy in my hands, feeling the weight of her words before I even read them. Inside, the letter wasn't long. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. She said she knew she'd destroyed something precious, and that no apology could fix what she'd done. She wrote that she hoped I could find peace, that maybe one day I'd meet someone who could give me what she couldn't. And then there was a line that stayed with me long after I folded the letter back into its envelope. Sometimes, the hardest part isn't losing someone. It's realizing they never really saw you at all. I sat with that for a long time. She was right, in a way. All those years, I tried to be what she needed to fill the gaps in her life, to be enough. But she'd never really seen me. Not the way I needed to be seen. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just sat there, feeling a strange sense of calm, as if a storm had finally passed, and I could breathe again. After I read Jenna's letter, I placed it carefully back into the envelope and tucked it away in a drawer. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because it felt like a piece of a past I couldn't erase, a quiet acknowledgement that this chapter was over. The days that followed were slow, but something in me shifted. I wasn't living in the shadow of what had happened anymore. I wasn't consumed by the need to understand or fix things. Instead, I focused on small, deliberate steps. I took on extra hours at work, not because I had to, but because it felt good to stay busy. I signed up for a weekend class at the community center, woodworking of all things, something I'd always wanted to try, but never made time for. It was during one of those classes that I met someone. Her name was Sarah. She wasn't flashy or dramatic, just kind, with a quiet smile and a laugh that felt like sunlight. We talked after class over coffee, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself laughing, really laughing, without bitterness clinging to the edges of my words. I didn't rush into anything. Sarah wasn't a rebound or a distraction. She was a reminder that life, in all its messy, painful, unpredictable glory, keeps moving. She showed me that it was possible to connect with someone again, not because I needed them to fill a hole, but because I genuinely enjoyed their company. The divorce was finalized quietly a few weeks later. No dramatic courtroom scenes, no last-minute reconciliations. Just a simple, legal ending to a story that had unraveled long before the papers were signed. When I signed the final documents, I felt a strange peace. Not happiness, exactly, but a quiet sense of closure. One evening, I stood by the lake again, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. I thought about the man I'd been when all this started, naive, trusting, maybe a little too willing to believe the best in people. And I thought about the man I was now, scarred, yes, but stronger, clearer, and finally ready to write a new chapter. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if Sarah would be part of it or if I'd walk that road alone. But for the first time in what felt like years, I was okay with not knowing. I turned away from the lake, took a deep breath, and started walking.